To William Hall, for permission to quote from the papers of his grandfather, Admiral Blinker Hall, deposited in Churchill College, Cambridge. To Michael Foote, for help over many years. To Richard Haldane, for kindly welcoming me to Clone, and for insights into the life of his great-uncle, Richard Burden Haldane. To J.P.A. Haldane, for permission to use the photograph of Haldane and Churchill. To Professor Jocelyn Hillgarth, for use of the photograph of his father, Alan Hillgarth, and for permission to quote from his letters and to reproduce the telegram on page 323. And to Sir Martin Gilbert, for the photograph of Ralph Wigram and Churchill in the garden at Chartwell, and other help. With Dr. Paul Addison, Director of the Centre for Second World War Studies at the University of Edinburgh, a good and supportive friend, I've enjoyed countless discussions on Churchill, and he also provided an invaluable critique of the manuscript. Andrew Lowney has been everything an author could expect of an agent, and more, bringing his own expertise on intelligence to bear in frequent helpful suggestions as the book developed. Grant McIntyre, my editor, has been a pleasure to work with, as have other members of the staff at 50 Albemarle Street, in particular Deborah Licorice, Carolyn Westmore, and Stephanie Allen. I'm also grateful to my indexer, Susan Hibbert. Many friends, colleagues, and others on both sides of the Atlantic have also helped. In particular, I would like to thank Richard Aldrich, Professor Christopher Andrew, Joan Bright Astley, David Bowler, Sir Robin Brooke, Anthony Montague Brown, Angus Calder, the late Robert Cecil, Martin Clark, Professor Richard Clogg, Sebastian Cox, Robin Denniston, Professor John Erickson, Professor John Ferris, Alan Francis, Jonathan Fruin, Professor J. L. Granatstein, Professor Michael Handel, Professor Peter Hennessy, Nicholas Hiley, Gerald de Groot, Ewan O'Halpin, Sir David Hunt, Lawrence James, Professor Rodri Jeffreys-Jones, the Right Honourable Lord Jenkins of Hillhead, Carol Kenwright, Tarka King, Richard Langworth, Paul Lashmar, Andrew Lysett, Professor James McConville, the late Sir Fitzroy MacLean, Sir Brooks Richards, Mark Seaman, Professor Sergiu Cerebriani, Professor Bradley Smith, Professor Dennis Smythe, Professor Wesley Walk, David Watson, Professor Donald Cameron Watt, Sir Peter Wilkinson. Finally, I would like to reserve my warmest thanks to Jan Canizzo, my keenest supporter and critic, who has accompanied me through the toil, tears, and sweat of my research and writing. Edinburgh, March 1997. There follows the author's introduction. In August 1953, a joint operation by Britain's Secret Intelligence Service and the American Central Intelligence Agency overthrew Iran's Prime Minister, Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh. The Shah, who had fled to Rome, returned to Tehran in triumph, and London and Washington celebrated a major intelligence coup. The local commander of this cloak-and-dagger affair was CIA officer Kermit Roosevelt, the 35-year-old grandson of Theodore and cousin to Franklin. A week later, over a celebratory lunch at the Connaught Hotel in London, he gave his British colleagues an exhaustive account of events. Then, still exhilarated by his exploits, he made his way to 10 Downing Street to meet the Prime Minister, Winston Churchill. Churchill had been returned to office for a second term as Prime Minister in 1951. Now, at 78, he was showing his age. Earlier that summer he had suffered a severe stroke, but characteristically defied his medical advisers and soldiered on. The news from Tehran had caught his imagination. Learning that Roosevelt was in London, he wanted a personal account of the overthrow of the man whom in private he had mocked as Mussy Duck. Ushered in by an aide, Roosevelt found Churchill lying in bed, propped up by pillows. The two men exchanged reminiscences about the last time they'd met, at the White House Christmas party shortly after Pearl Harbor. Then Roosevelt launched into his tale. From time to time Churchill dozed off, only to awake and grill the American on a point of detail. Finally, when Roosevelt had